Okay, this is my fourth time recording this because I keep messing up my recording in different ways. But here is how you create a radial progress bar with rounded tips. So first thing we're going to do is right click, create a new material. I'm going to call it M radial progress bar. And go ahead and open that up. By default, materials are set to surface materials. We need to change it to a user interface material. I like to go over here with the little eyeball and hit show border so I can see where the confines of the texture is. So the first thing I want to do is make it so we actually have a radial gradient, which is the data we'll use to actually drive a radial progress bar. So right click and we're going to find a node called vector to radial value. And by default, if we take our vector converted to angle and plug that into final color, you can see it already gives us a gradient that starts at 0 and in a 360-degree rotation goes all the way to 1. So when you have a number that's represented as color in a shader, 0 is represented as black and 1 is represented as white. Anything below 0 is also black, anything above 1 is also white. Now we can use the step node. If we search for a step, this basically takes any value below this value is kept and anything above it is not kept. So if we plug this in as 1, you'll see it turns completely white because every single value in this is at least 1. So this is keeping everything 1 and below. But if we change it to something like 0.7, we get something like this. It takes every value that is 0.7 and below and gets rid of every value above 0.7. So we can just use this to directly control our progress. If we have 0.2, it's just a little bit of progress. 0.1, even less. 0.5 is halfway progress. So that's how we control our radial progress. Now, of course, we don't want this to be a square. We want this to be a ring. So in the opacity, we need to mask out a circle shape. Now, opacity is grayed out, so we need to change the blend mode from opaque to translucent, which will allow it to support translucency. And to get a circle, the best way I know of is to get the radial gradient exponential node. And if we plug this into final color first, we can see it creates a circle, but it has a very, very soft edge. So what I like to do is get a constant by holding down 1 and clicking, which just gives us a number, and I found a value of 300 looks pretty good for me for density. If we plug that in, that looks really sharp. Now you might just be thinking, well, you could just put a number like insanely high to make sure it's perfectly sharp. And I don't know how well this will show up on video, but I have noticed if you go too high, you kind of get this weird artifacting because it's just trying to be so insanely sharp and there's like no aliasing whatsoever. And if you go too low, like 100, the edge just looks a little bit too soft to me. I don't know how well all this shows up on video, but for me, the sweet spot is about 300. I think it looks really nice. Great, so now we have our circle. So if we instead put that in opacity and then put this back in our final color, we now have a pie chart, essentially. So 0.4, and basically our radial progress is masked by this circle. But once again, we don't want a circle, we want a ring. So to get a ring, we take one circle and subtract it from the other. So I'm going to put this back into final color just to demonstrate. And I'm going to copy and paste this. And we want to make the second circle smaller because we're subtracting the second circle from the first circle. So we have this input called radius. By default, 0.5, which takes up the entire texture. 0.5 would be half the texture. So let's try getting something like 0.3. So I'll hold down 1, click again, and let's do 0.3. I'll plug that into radius, and then let's see what this one looks like if we put it into final color. Perfect, so we have a smaller circle. So let's subtract the smaller one from the larger one. If we get a subtract node and subtract this from that one, put in the final color, that's how we get our ring, which looks great. So if we move that to opacity, put this back into final color, now you can see we have our radial progress bar. Now, if you're making one with just flat lines like this, then it would be perfect. You're pretty much done here, but we want those nice rounded tips that look really professional. Now, I also want to make it a parameter to be able to adjust how thick this bar is. And we could just do that by changing the size of the middle circle. So if I want it thinner, we want to make the middle circle bigger. So like 0.4 would be thinner. 0.5 will make it invisible because that makes the circles the same size. And you can go as low as 0, I guess, which just gives you a full pie chart. So let's go ahead and make a parameter for that. I'll hold down S and click, and then we can call this thickness. Now, I don't want to have to remember that the number is 0 to 0.5, and then also 0.5 is a thinner bar and 0 is a thicker bar. So instead, let's make this a value going between 0 and 1 by selecting it and going down to slider max and choosing 1 right there. And then let's convert it to the 0 to 0.5. So first off, 0.5 is the thinner version, 0 is the thicker version. So first we want to invert our parameter by getting a 1 minus. So instead of 0 to 1, it becomes 1 to 0. Oops, didn't mean to hit that. And then instead of 0 to 1, we want it to be 0 to 0.5, so we can multiply it by 0.5. Although I'm personally going to multiply it by 0.49 because a value of 0.5 makes the bar disappear completely, and I always want it to be perfectly available. So with a thickness of 0, this is as thin as the ring could possibly get. If you want it even thinner, you could do 499, and then you'll get this tiny little sliver. And of course, 0.5 will make it go away completely. You could have that too if you want, but I don't want to accidentally mess myself up like that. So I'll go with 0.49. And then if we go with 1, that is as thick as it could be, which is just an entire pie chart. So I will go with something like 0.3, and I think that thickness looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and add the rounded tips now. And the way the rounded tips are going to work is we're basically going to draw 2 more circles, small circles this time, and we're just going to place them directly on the ends of our progress bar. And if they're filled in the same color, then we just get that nice rounded look that we're looking for. So to create 2 more circles, we have to create more radial gradient exponentials. I'm just going to copy one for now and put it up here. And I'm also going to copy the 300 for the density. And this time we want the radius to be half of the thickness of our bar. So to do that, let's first get the diameter, which is just the outer circle minus the inner circle. And that's the length of the diameter of the bar. So this one I'm always going to leave as 0.5, so it always reaches the edge of the texture. So I'm just going to hard code that in. So we'll get a subtract node, and we'll do 0.5 minus whatever the radius is from our current thickness. And this is the diameter of the thickness right here. This is the length of that, but we want a radius for a circle, so we need to divide it by 2. So we'll do a divide node, divide by 2, and then I will save this to a named reroute node. Now, if you're using an older version of Unreal, these didn't exist yet. I don't remember what engine they're added, but they're still relatively new. I'm going to call it thickness radius. So if named reroute nodes aren't an option for you, you'll just have to drag the pin up and plug it in wherever I plug in the thickness radius. This is essentially just like saving it to a variable to reuse at separate spots. So for this circle up here, I will get my thickness radius, plug that into radius, and let's go ahead and just plug this into final color and get rid of the opacity to test. Yeah, that looks about right. But of course, it's directly in the center and we need it on our ring. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move it over to the side. We have this center position input right here. I will hold down 2 and click, which gives us a vector 2. So we have its x value and its y value for where it is on our texture. And by default, it's 0.5. If I do that and plug it in, nothing will change because that's our perfect center. So let's go 1 on the x. Oops. If we go 1 on the x, it goes all the way to the right. But of course, we don't want it this much to the right. We want it this much minus its own radius. So instead of hard coding that, let's use the thickness radius variable. Also in newish versions of Unreal, we can get the X and the Y pins separately. If you don't have that on an older version, you will have to get the component mask and just check R for the X value and then G for the Y value. So you'll need 2 of them. But for me, look at the X value as 1. We will then subtract the thickness radius, and then we will append a vector to create a new vector 2D, and then the Y will actually just stay the same. And then plug that into the center position, and then we have it perfectly on the edge. Great. So if we plug these back in, we have our vector to radial value into our final color and this into our opacity. And then if we add this circle to the end of it and plug that into final color, you can see we already have our first rounded edge and it looks perfect. Now, how do we get our edge on the second spot? Because you always need it to be where the progress bar is. So first off, let's just copy and paste all of this because we are going to need a second one eventually. And once again, I'm going to remove these to just preview what we have up here. Most nodes do have a little preview button. You can see this little play button. If you click on that, then you preview what this node sees, but the material functions don't have that. So that's why I disconnect everything and plug them in. So we want to rotate this to be where the end of the progress bar is, which was right about here. So we will get a node called custom rotator and plug rotator values into UVs. Now this disappears for a second because for some reason, this material function for the UVs, it already takes our texture coordinates into account. So like plugging this into that gives us the exact same result because inside this material function it already uses it. But for the custom rotator, it doesn't. So we do have to plug these in manually for the UVs. Then if we plug this in here, you can see now it's the exact same. If you don't know the texture coordinates, which I'll preview right now, just map out a red value on the from left to right, 0 to 1. So no red versus all the way red and everything in between. And then the same for green up and down. And that kind of naturally gives you this yellow when they start to mix. And this is nice because then you get 0 to 1 here, 0 to 1 here, and then you could get any coordinate on top of your texture if you want to place something in a specific position. So if I want something in the bottom right corner, I could say you could place it at 1, 1 of the texture. So that's what this is used for. Great. And then we want to rotate this circle around, but we don't want to rotate it around its own pivot. We want to rotate it around the center of the entire texture. Because if you can imagine, let me draw this out. If we, let's say it's here by default, and we want it here to rotate it, we essentially just pivot it from here. You can imagine a stick holding it from the center, and the stick rotates like that, and then we get our perfect rotation like that. So if we rotate from the center, that would just be a value of 0.5, because that's the direct center according to our texture coordinates. And the rotation angle is anywhere between 0 and 1. So for now, let me just plug something in arbitrarily. Let's do 0.25. That should rotate at 90 degrees. And yeah, see, now it's perfectly on the top. Now, this value needs to be based off our progress for our radial gradient. It needs to be based on how far along this is. So first off, let's put this as a parameter because we need to change it at runtime. So hold down at S and click, and then I will call this progress, and let's see, what's it at, 0.8. I'll leave it at that by default. And then I also want to save this as a named reroute, just like this, and named reroute, and just call it the same thing, progress, and plug it into the X. Now, I do want to point out that you could technically copy and paste this and just get the same value. And if they're named the same, they'll always be treated as the same value. But I don't like to do it like that, because if I decide to rename it and I only rename one, the other one doesn't get updated, and now the engine considers these as separate parameters. So just for safety, I prefer using this method of caching it in a named reroute, and then I can just grab it over here and call for progress. Okay, so let's go back to previewing this second circle node here. I'm going to plug this back into Final Color. So instead of 0.25, I will plug in the rotation angle, and this is actually inverted of what we want. So it's rotating it the opposite way of what we want. So we need to invert it with a 1-. And you might be able to already tell that it's already in the right spot if we plug this into Final Color, plug this into our opacity. And before we add on the starting tip, let's combine the ending tips together by doing an add, and then combining it with our radius. And you see it's perfectly in position. And if we change the progress, it should always match up with it. So let's do 0.6, 0.3, and there you go. That looks perfect. Great. So now what if you want your progress bar to start somewhere that isn't on the right side? I think most people prefer it to start on the top and not on the right here. Well, with that, we can rotate our entire vector to radial value node, which once again, I'll preview as just being our, or actually I'll preview without the step, is just like this. And we want this line not to be at the right, but at the top, where we can just rotate that entire thing by messing with the UVs here. So let's get our texture coordinates. Let's get a custom rotator. And once again, we want to rotate around the center. So let's hold on 2 and click and make sure the center is 0.5. Now this vector to radial value already accounts for putting the gradient in the center rather than the default, which would be the top left. So we need to compensate for that. You see, if I put this into vector 2D, it gets completely full, and that's because it's been offset to start at this top left corner rather than the middle. So just to compensate for that, doing it that inside of this node, we can just subtract 0.5 and plug that in, and then it's back into the center. Cool. So once again, we can get a rotation angle, and then we can rotate the entire bar. So if I hold on 1, and let's say we want to rotate it 90 degrees, so I'll do 0.25 and plug that into rotation angle. Now this is starting here, and the progress is ending there. If we mess with the progress, you can see it grows 0.8. This is the starting point. That's the ending point. But the rounded tips are no longer following it because it needs to account for this rotation as well. But before we do that, I want to make this a parameter as well, so we can update it outside of it. So if I hold down S and click, and I will call it entire bar rotation. I don't like that the rotation angle is a value between 0 and 1. 0 and 360 makes a lot more sense to me. So I'm going to make this have a max value of 360, and then let's do the math to convert it to 0 to 1, which is as simple as dividing it by 360. And then if I were just to plug it in like that, then I could change this to 90, which makes more sense to me, and now it starts from 90. Although I do feel like this should be the default, and this shouldn't be 90 degrees away, so I will take the divide, and then I will add on 0.25 on top of that, plug that into rotation angle. So now when our parameter is 0, it's like this. And if I wanted to rotate it 90, it would be like this. One other thing, and this is just personal preference to me, is I don't like that it rotates counterclockwise. That just feels off to me. So I like to change the divide to negative 360, because when I enter a new value here, I just feel like it should rotate in the other way than it does by default. But that's personal preference. So I'll leave that at 0, and now it starts here, and we can change that rotation, whatever. Now we need to account for this rotation for our tips over here, which I will comment out, call this rounded tips. And let's once again save this as a reroute. So reroute node, oops, not the original, named reroute declaration. I'll call this the same thing, entire bar rotation. And then all we have to do is add that onto our rotation of the rounded tips. So we take our progress here, we add on the entire bar rotation. This should fix the end tip. Yep, there it is. And then we don't even have a custom rotator for the bottom one, so we'll need to add it. So let's copy these 3 nodes, paste, plug that into UVs, and then the rotation angle will simply just be the entire bar rotation. So it rotates with the entire bar. Sweet. So now if we can change any value, let's do 0.4. That looks good. We can rotate the bar. Let's go 135 degrees. That still looks good. And we can change the thickness, do like 0.6, and that looks great. So I'll change these back to defaults that I like, 0.7, and let's leave that at 0. And there we go. Our bar looks really, really good. Now let's add some color into there before we continue. I'm going to click the eyeball here, go to background, and make the alpha checkerboard rather than black, so you can see, you can differentiate the black from the transparent background. And for final color, since we have a black and white value, it's perfect for using a lerp between 2 colors. So if we get a lerp node and we get 2 colors, I'll hold down V and click to create a vector parameter. I'll call this one background color. And same thing, fill color, and let's just plug these in and use this as the alpha and plug that into final color. And if we make the fill color, let's say like red, there we go. Now we can customize both colors, make that one like blue, and that looks great. Now, if you want to take opacity into account for these bars, right now this ring that we've created is the only thing affecting opacity. So let's say if I wanted to make this like a very invisible blue, it's still perfectly opaque. So what we need to do is first off, not only take the RGB values, we want the entire RGBA value, the A is the alpha, and then make sure we're considering the alpha for the opacity. So if we take off here, which gives us RG, B, and A values, we need to mask it out so we only get the A value, only the alpha values. And then we can just multiply that with everything else we have considered for our opacity. And now we can get transparent rings as well. Now it's kind of hard to see with this red color, but let me try to change it to something. You can see we have this weird extra dark area here. And what's happening there is we are adding all these values together. So if I preview this, we have our everything in the white is considered 1, everything in the black is considered 0. So when we add that on top of this value, you can't see it because anything above 1 is also displayed as white. You can't display anything as more white than perfectly white, but the parts where they overlap is actually considered as 2 rather than 1 because you're adding 1 on top of 1, which, 1 plus 1 is 2. So before we put this into the alpha, we want to saturate it, and this just clamps it between a value of 0 and 1. And there we go. That fixes our issue right there. Okay, so this is the final material. I'm going to show you how to put it into a widget and use it as a widget. The project files are all available for free on my website, geckogamedev.com, in which I've also made a horror course. If you're interested in making a complete horror game from scratch, it's currently 80 episodes, and it's currently half off since it is still in early access, and there are more episodes to come. So if that interests you at all, please go check it out. That would mean a lot to me. Okay, now let's figure out how to use this properly in a widget. So I will right-click, create a new widget blueprint. Going to call it radial progress bar. Open that. And all we need to add is an image. I'm going to set the display mode to desired, so it doesn't try to fill up the whole screen. Select the image. The image will need to be a variable because we need to assign the material to it. We don't want to assign it here because we need to make a dynamic material instance, which I'll explain in a second. So on the pre-construct, let's create a dynamic material instance of the type radial progress bar, which is the material we just made. And it needs to be a dynamic material instance. We can create regular material material instances by right-clicking on a material and going to create material instance, which allows us to create subversions of each kind by messing with the parameters that we decided here. But these can't be messed with at runtime unless it's a dynamic material instance, which can only be created through code, or blueprints. So now we have a dynamic material instance where we can mess with the parameters. Let's promote it to a variable. And we'll just call it radial progress bar mat. And then let's take our image and assign or set brush from material and plug that in. And since this is on the pre-construct, it runs even during the editor. So go back to designer, it's already set up perfectly. So now let's add ways to adjust all the values that we made. So I'm going to make a couple functions for that. I'll do set progress, and we will get our variable for the progress bar material, and we will do set scalar parameter value, and that's where we can set scalar parameters. Let's go in here, and it's just called progress. We have to make sure it's typed and spelled the exact same way for it to work. And we'll do progress, and we can make the value an input. Let's also do set bar colors, and pretty much the exact same thing. I'm going to copy this reference, paste it, and we need to set a vector parameter value. Let's double check what we call these. It's background space color. Let's go ahead and just get rid of that space, and fill color. So let's do background color, and let's do it like a pink, and copy paste, make sure the variable is plugged in, and let's also do fill color, and let's make it like a green, I don't know, Wanda and Cosmo. And lastly, let's do ones for set thickness and set bar rotation. Then for these, I'm just going to go into set progress, copy this, paste it into set thickness, make that an input, make sure the parameter name is thickness, and paste it into bar rotation, make that an input, and let me double check what I called this one. It was entire bar rotation. Entire bar rotation, make sure to spell it exactly the same way you did in the material. To set these up at runtime, let's call all of these right in the pre-construct. Set bar colors, set thickness, set bar rotation, and then we can promote these to variables. So we'll call this progress. This one I forgot to actually put as inputs, and that means I have to choose the default colors again. Now we're getting different colors. This will be background color. This one will be fill color, and these inputs honestly should reflect those names as well. So I'll call that background color and fill color and graph. Promote this to variable thickness, promote this to variable, and we'll call it bar rotation. All right, for progress, I'm also going to make sure the value range is clamped to what it has to be. So progress can only be between 0 and 1, thickness can only be between 0 and 1, and bar rotation can only be between 0 and 360. Let's also make sure all of these are exposed so that we can see them when we create instances. And if we go to the designer, it's all set up now, except all the default values are really, really low. So let's go ahead and select the class right here by selecting whatever your class name is right there. And let's make progress like 0.6. Let's add a little thickness. And let's see, rotation. I'll leave that to 0 by default. The background color doesn't look like it's working correctly. So let's double check why that is. I remember I renamed it here. Background color. Oh, there we go. I think I just needed to save it again. Although I definitely liked how it looked better. That's like a dark gray and little opacity. Perfect. Okay, that looks awesome. Okay, so now we have our class of the actual widget. So let's assume you have a HUD that's already been added to your screen. Like this is just your regular gameplay HUD. Then you could just come in here. We can search for radial progress bar. It's the one we created. Drag that in. Make sure it's a square so it looks proper. And you can see we have all these values on the right because we expose them, which means we can edit it directly in editor, which is awesome. And let's say you want to edit it at runtime. For now, I will just go to the tick. I will grab it. I have to make it a variable first. I will grab it, and we'll do set progress. Now, there's two options here, the function that we made and then the variable that we made. But we don't want to set the variable because setting the variable doesn't set the actual scalar parameter that we do inside the function here. So let's take our variables and make sure they're all private so that we can't adjust them by accident and wonder why it's not working. So I'm just selecting all 5 of these, making them private, and going back into my HUD, compile and save. And now if we search for set progress, we only get the function. Now, so if you ever need to get the values, like what is our progress, then you would have to make more functions for that. So we could do get progress and get our radial progress bar material, get scalar parameter value, and it's just the same process. We'd call that progress, and then we would want to return a value, and let's make that function pure. Actually, this one might not work as pure because this node seems to need execution pins, so I haven't tested it, but this one might need to not be pure for it to work, which is fine. And then you now have that option to get progress as well. So just to test this, if this is working on the tick, setting the progress, I will get the game time in seconds. I will convert that into a sine wave. That gives us a value of -1 to 1, but I want 0 to 1, so I will add 1 and then divide by 2, and that will give us a value of 0 to 1, and hit compile and save. Now I've already added this MyHUD to the screen, so if I hit play, we can test, and there it is. It's getting bigger and it's getting smaller. So one more bonus thing, you can see it never fully disappears, because when it gets to 0, you can still see the two circles overlapping each other. So if that's how you want it, then it's totally fine. If you don't want it like that, the fix we can do for that is make them disappear if the progress is, say, less than 1%. So for the alpha of the colors here between background and fill, we have all this math to figure out how we want this to look. But if the progress is less than 1%, we could also just make all of this disappear. So we could get an if statement, and the two values we want to compare is one, the progress, which I have a named reroute node for, and we want to check it against 1%, which is 0.01. If progress is greater than 1% or equal to 1%, we continue. And if it's less than 1%, then we don't want to display any fill at all, so we could just plug in a 0. Hit apply. And now, if we play again, you can see once it reaches completely 0, the bar will go away completely, just like that. So it's your call which direction you want it to look. I hope everything made sense. If it didn't, please leave me a comment. This video was made because somebody left me a comment asking for it. So please, ask me about anything you want to learn about. Check out my website for the files in the horror course, and I'll see you next time.